Feedback tends to fall into two categories, for better or worse, and mostly for worse. Either it's not useful or specific, or it comes way too late, or much worse, not at all. In my very first job many moons ago, I got feedback from my then manager at the end of each year, a practice still so very common in the much dreaded performance review season. Only months after something actually happened, did I learn that it hurt my chances of reaching my own goals for the year. I wasn't exactly angling for a promotion, but did long for a salary bump. It was a disappointment to find out only when I couldn't actually fix anything and had to wait another year. Again, this is still rather common practice today. The disappointment is still very real. Years later, I was in the same position as my then manager, and I struggled, nay failed. I failed the people working for me. I just didn't have any feedback when asked. I was still early in my management career, but that's not an excuse. Someone reporting to me asked me for feedback. I was caught off guard and mumbled something about thinking about it and coming back to him later. Not to exaggerate, but in hindsight, this was a formative experience for me. That and the few times I witnessed where someone on my leadership team asked for feedback from the group with the simple phrase, "Feedback welcome." And then they later complained to me that they didn't get any and that everyone else seemed to ignore them. Feedback isn't just a medium to help people be their best selves. It's a glue that holds entire teams together. All the talk about wanting trust and transparency is meaningless when feedback isn't flowing openly. Why is it so difficult then? Why does it come so infrequently or not at all? Giving good feedback takes time. Accepting and incorporating feedback requires to dial down one's ego. Accepting that the feedback you gave is only one perspective of many, and that you also don't know everything, takes humility. So to give and receive good feedback, the work starts with ourselves, as it so often does in leadership. It takes time and patience, which is also why we've taken a bit more time today to dive into feedback. Join Sara and I to find out what makes for good feedback, what it helps us do, and where you can start improving yours. So, in our book, we have a chapter called The Culture of Feedback. And the illustration for that chapter is a group of marmots squawking back and forth at each other. And we felt this is a pretty apt illustration for the types of feedback conversations we've had throughout our careers. People, including ourselves, talking past and over each other. And also, we just really wanted to have an illustration featuring marmots in our book. It is probably one of the cutest. If you see this on video, this is what it looks like. It is adorable. So we thought feedback would be a good podcast episode. And so in this episode, we'll talk about why feedback is important and also why it's so challenging. And I personally am coming into this from just having facilitated an offsite where I asked a leadership team to provide each other with feedback for maybe the first time and also in a very open forum. There are 5 of them, and I gave them an exercise sheet as one does, and then they had to read the feedback to each other out loud. And it was intense for many, and it brought me back maybe to one of my earlier feedback conversations, or maybe the earliest ones in my career in management, that were just scary in some ways. And so, this is a very fresh topic for me, and I'm curious, Sara, what comes to mind for you when you think about feedback?
Okay, well, first, the marmots are so cute. I think it is, I like to say my favorites, but I think it is one of, if not my favorite illustration in the whole book, the marmots. squawking at each other. And as I've shared with you, Matthias, it's often how every feedback conversation I experienced throughout my career. So yeah, what comes to mind? What do I think about when I think about feedback? I mean, it's so mixed because I sort of get sweaty palms and I kind of just brings back all sorts of unsatisfying memories. But it ultimately, like when I think about feedback, I think about learning and I think about improvement and not judgment. Like it's really about learning and improvement. And I think like as I've grown in my own manager kind of skills and leader skills is like, and my coaching skills, helping someone to see what they can't see themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And it's a really important responsibility. Like I think feedback is a responsibility. And often, just like you were saying, you know, I have so many clients and teams that just don't have a practice of regular feedback. And I don't know why. And even Matthias, you've pointed out there are a lot of business books in the world, but not a lot that are really honest about feedback for some reason.
Yeah. Very true. Yeah, I've done some research lately on this topic, not just for this episode, but also for a different forum. Yeah, there's not really a lot you can find on what good feedback looks like. And it takes me back to the earliest days of my work in management. I think over time, I've come around to feedback maybe being as a more of a catalyst, and a catalyst of positive change. And I know that, it sounds slightly weird, maybe coming from a German, because it's not necessarily, what we focus on, but it can, excuse my business French, it can unlock potential. In that, it can point out to somebody what they're doing well in some ways to help them understand what they contribute, right? And what the stuff is they need to do more of. And it also helps maybe you as a manager and then the people on the receiving end of feedback to understand what boundaries are, right? And when you've overstepped them. And that, doesn't always have to imply anything like negative consequences or something like that. But one of the earliest feedbacks I had to give was somebody overstepping behavioral boundaries. And that made it extra scary to give that feedback. But it was just important. Otherwise, that person would have just continued doing what they did.
Right.
Yeah. Really one of my earliest feedback experiences that I don't think back fondly, but it was, it's the first one, especially when you have to give someone tough feedback for the very first time.
That's a tough, yeah.
That it's a challenge and it sticks with you. And
yeah.
Yeah. How about yourself?
Well, I do just want to point out that my German friend has used the word catalyst and unlock. And we have just a little bit of foreshadowing here is that we do intend to have a podcast episode on buzzwords and, business lingo. So just going to put a pin in that over there. But, yeah, I mean, so much of what you said, I feel like, and we talk a little bit about this in our book, there's a whole mindset that has to go, I think, with feedback, right? Like feedback's best when both the giver and the receiver are approaching it in the right mindset. Like I'm not a big fan of just random drive-by feedback. And like so many of the feedback I received, it just felt like I'm being criticized rather than I'm thinking about it like, what can I learn here? And that's a super important. Like if I am able to go into the conversation, I'm able to help the receiver go into the conversation with that learning mindset, it changes so much. And that it's really about helping someone to grow. But there's that's that hard part about it, which is you're really evaluating someone's behavior or someone's progress.
Someone's
so I don't know.
Performance to throw in another business word.
Yeah. And really like, I mean, that's what feedback is. It's helping to close or helping to clarify or just put a spotlight on, what the intention is versus where the impact is. I don't know. Like it's supposed to point out a disconnect, right? Anyway, and it's supposed to ultimately support growth and other buzzwords like alignment, and it should build trust. But the challenge with feedback is it has to be regular. It can't be a lecture. It has to be a regular thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't know if that answered your question, but it was sort of where my mind went.
Well, that's all we're after. This is all what this podcast is about, I guess. I mean, you've covered already like one angle of why it's important, right? Feedback is a growth vehicle, and I'm just throwing more business terms out there, but in some ways, it helps us understand our blind spot. As you said, it's a learning opportunity, right? I can learn something about myself that I would not, necessarily see myself, because it's always a matter of, everybody brings different perspectives into the mix. And you never see yourself, for example, in a meeting, be the person who starts talking as barely as someone else has finished their sentence. Right? To you, it's just an intuitive response, as one example. And for everyone else, it's an annoyance, right? But you don't really think about it because you just do it, and nobody has told you that it can be a destructive behavior in a meeting.
Yeah.
We only see part of that particular whole. And especially this, here we get to tough feedback and maybe the learning opportunity and what people call maybe negative feedback generally. It, helps us figure out what the behaviors are that are annoying others, that are destructive, damaging, or that, so for odd reasons, just put an immediate stop to meetings, even though that might not have been the intention. People stop talking and then the meeting is over, even though people had maybe more left to say.
Right. Yeah.
And I recently read or started reading Marshall Goldsmith's book, What Got You Here Won't Get You There. Old classic almost. And he summed this up quite nicely, or put a slightly different spin on it. Like, he talked about how when you advance in senior leadership roles, the highest impact that we can achieve at work in terms of change isn't about learning new things, learning new skills, or improving our experience horizon, just adding to, the skills and things that we bring into a role. It is the behaviors, right? It's changing our behaviors, but that requires us to gather these perspectives, to get that feedback from folks, and learn how our behaviors, whether it's in meetings or in a podcast episode recording, or however else we communicate or behave, how that impacts the people around us. And it does require a sense of curiosity and also wanting to make those changes.
Yeah. Very well said. I think it's important. It comes down to what you said at the very beginning. It's all about growth, right? It's about growth and learning. And in order to have that, you have to have that curiosity. You have to have that willingness. And if you want to build a culture of growth and learning and understanding, which I can say just about every founder I work with, like, has some values and principles that they've listed around wanting to have a culture of growth and of learning and of curiosity. Feedback is a critical component to that. And, feedback is ultimately a mirror, right? Like you said, it's uncovering blind spots. It's someone else holding up a mirror to show you things that you can't see yourself, that you may not be able to see yourself or you're not aware of. And that's, making that a part of your culture and a safe process, a regular process, really, really important. I often ask, my coaching clients, when was the last time, you had a feedback conversation with this individual, this direct report? And, I get the blank stare, like, a feedback conversation? Like, do you have do you have a feedback log? Just a simple place where you're recording feedback, simple things. And I get the blank stare. Go ahead.
Feedback log, one of the nicest tools to have in your repertoire to prepare for feedback conversation. Not to jump ahead too far, but I mean, it is one of the things where if you keep that for everybody on your team and note down things that have happened, whatever feedback format you use, You have a nice history of feedback, and also it's easier to prepare for, well, whenever the next feedback conversation happens, right?
Right. Right. Yeah.
I mean, I have those same conversations with my clients, and some of them I lead back to, I mean, they usually evolve around the word performance and
Yeah.
somebody not performing super well, or that's how they view it, right? And they would like to, well, either give that person feedback or have them, suffer the consequences, whatever those may be. I always like to take them back to the beginning, even, the stuff that happened before the feedback conversation, ideally, which is about expectations,
Right.
right? When, does this person know what you expect from them? And by extension, does this person know, well, what success looks like, right? And what it might look like when things are going off the rails or in the wrong direction. And that
Yeah.
usually yields more blank stares. And, I want to add, we say this in the sweetest way possible, because usually, the reasons for this, like why expectations usually aren't clear, is it's usually a matter of time or the lack thereof.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, especially when you have a growing organization, you somehow expect people are maybe self-learners, or they will, pick up everything as they go along, and they will automatically, maybe even intuitively, do things in the way that you want them to do things.
Right. Right.
And, there's probably less than a 50% chance of that actually working out. And for some reason, the people we hire early, it works. But then as we, keep growing, it doesn't, because like
Right.
nobody accumulates all of that knowledge as quickly, maybe as the early employees, or they haven't had all of that benefit of the additional context from maybe years of working together.
Right. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's the biggest one for me, taking that step. And it's, and once that step is taken, once that conversation happened, everything already flows a little bit easier. Like everybody
Right.
knows what you can give feedback on and what you can get feedback on.
Right.
Right. And again, people always fear it's a thing about micromanagement if you set expectations in too much detail, but it's really about being clear with each other. Like,
Right.
and you don't have to dictate everything, but rather just make it a conversation, right? Talk about, are these expectations realistic? Or then,
Yeah.
taking it further, what kind of support do you need to achieve, to live up to these expectations?
Right. Right.
But it takes time.
Yeah. I was just thinking that it takes time. Right. Yeah. It just has me thinking of just how many feedback conversations don't start with that simple, are we clear on the expectations? Let's talk about what your understanding is of the expectations for this project or for this role or for this situation. And let's see if there's a gap. Where do you see yourself for these expectations? What's your timeline for this? Where do you need help or support? I think that's such a great way to start, because it's about grounding and anchoring the conversation around clear expectations.
Yeah.
And you're right; it can easily get into micromanagement, but that's not the point. As I think it's about just having a clear starting point.
Hmm.
Yeah.
The other problem with feedback that you've already mentioned is that it's only given very rarely. It's a matter of taking the time, and there never really being enough time. So like, I just recently had a conversation with a client where, they have performance season like every so many months. And it's always a scramble. It's always a
Yep.
scramble trying to look back at, well, what even happened? Like, what did this person do? What did they do well? Where did they not do well? I mean, it's a challenge for the person giving the feedback, but it's also like when you're on the receiving end, there are more challenges for this, where you might end up being like, well, my promotion kind of hinged on this. Couldn't you
Yeah.
have told me this sooner so I would have had time to correct?
Yeah.
I will be honest, performance review season is a super odd concept to me. Like, it's just,
Yeah. This is the one I see. I mean, it's 100%. it is only given rarely is the number one issue of establishing a meaningful feedback process or framework in your companies. Like one of the last things I did in my very corporate job, where I was managing a very large team, was the annual performance review cycle. And it wasn't the first time. It was, once again, incredibly painful for everything you're talking about, Matthias. Everything. Everyone was like scrambling. I call it spelunking. They were like trying to figure out what happened this year, going back to their calendar, their email, the drive, trying to find out what did this person do? What did I do? I even doing my own self-evaluation. And then, there's these mid-year checkups and it's the same thing. And of course, then if you're only doing it around performance review, it's super, super challenging. And I experience this myself, and I often hear it from my coaching clients that they just don't have enough time. And I'm like, well, you're meeting with this person one-on-one weekly or every other week. What if, just an idea, what if you just made 10 minutes of that conversation every single time, just a space for feedback, or once a month even?
Yeah.
And making it important, and doing the feedback log, so that you actually have a log, so that when you get to this mid-year check-in or the end of year performance cycle, you already have a lot of information and there's no surprises between you and your teammate.
Yeah, agreed. It's a feedback log. I mean, performance review season seems an inevitable thing to happen in growing your organization for reasons beyond my capacity to understand. But at least when that is the case and you come with something like a feedback log, that particular step is only maybe summarizing what has already been said, rather than having to come up and scramble with just trying to look back at half a year or a full year. So, I mean, feedback log, it's a genius little invention. And I also like your idea of making dedicated time in a one-on-one, whether it's, as you said, 10 minutes every time, or once a month, you make one of these meetings all about feedback. And then it also goes both ways. And you really quickly build up records of feedback, and also just the habit, right? There's a clear expectation. Feedback happens at this meeting. And it's also, if feedback is not flowing, that's a meta conversation to be had, why it isn't flowing. Right. Yep. So, if it just gets pushed back, it's like, oh no, I don't have anything this week. I don't have anything this week or next week and the following week. That's another conversation to have.
Right. So true. So true. I've been on both sides of that, where I've sort of been like, nothing, and I've also been, in our notes, I've been guilty of this, of not providing specific enough feedback. And to me, that gets back to recalibrating on expectations. I've definitely done you're doing well, you're doing great, you're doing awesome. Just not very American, very Californian, not specific enough.
I've done that too.
Or I've focused too much on the good and not on, and it's not about good or bad. It's important to just always be improving, always be learning. So it's not a bad thing. It's just hey, I thought you could actually be a little bit clearer in this conversation or in this meeting or with this initiative. And here's some ideas of how to prepare differently next time. That's not a bad thing. That's just trying to go from 80% to 90% and just a little bit more clear each time. I think one thing that we haven't talked about is the power differential. So much of feedback is complicated by the fact that it's often between, a manager and an employee, or, a boss and an employee, a founder. And, there's power differentials, there's cultural differences, there's gender differences.
All true. I was thinking back to maybe also, again, to founders or folks who have kind of maybe found themselves in, senior leadership positions by virtue of being a founder, right? Or it was a gap that needed to be filled. They used to be one of the team, right? And in a smaller team, smaller company, that power differential is not as obvious or not as present. But as the company grows, as the team grows around them, they would love feedback, right? And they tell their team, it's the same as telling your team, my door is always open, right? But then disregard the fact there's all kinds of risk attached to giving your boss feedback, whether that risk is actually real or whether it's just a fear you have. I mean, the reality is your boss probably could in some way either, block your career advancement in the company or get you fired, depending on where you are and how easy that is in the world. It is very real. And
Yeah.
it's frustrating to you as a senior leader because you want the feedback, you want to uncover the blind spots, but it just doesn't happen on its own because as the higher up you are, even the people who report directly to you, the impact of your response to their feedback might be getting more and more severe.
Right. Right. This is why feedback is challenging. It's especially the tough kind, right? Like it's hard to give the feedback. It's also hard to receive the feedback. I often fear what the other person's going to how the other person's going to react,
Yeah.
what their response might be. This is not always easy, and that's part of it. Especially if you haven't set up a feedback process or continue, more regular feedback cycles, these things come out of the blue, and
Yeah.
it makes it more likely that the response might not be well received. That might trigger anger, or it might trigger, someone to quit. It might trigger someone to not receive it well, and that's just as important for the person giving the feedback as it is the person receiving the feedback. So, I
Yeah.
often say, don't start with a laundry list of all the things that you want this person to change or fix. Like, it has to be very focused and on specific situations. This isn't the time to just drop everything into, this feedback conversation. Like, make
Yeah.
it very specific, right? And we talk about that, about giving good feedback in our book for sure.
Yeah. I think an important part of that is that the first time then when that loop of feedback isn't established, the first time that you start thinking about it is usually when things are already bad. And
Right,
so
right.
your first feedback conversation is just going to be, as
It's
you
a
said, like,
crisis. It's a crisis.
it's a crisis. And that will, even before the meeting, you're going to be on edge as the person giving the feedback. The person receiving the feedback will either be, well, equally anxious, depending on how you prepared them for this meeting, or they will leave completely deflated.
Yeah,
Their fight or flight response might instantly be triggered, or they might also just be, and rightfully so, wondering, where the hell is all of this coming from all of a
right,
sudden? Like, it's not a great way to build the trust that is required for feedback, but also the trust that is generally reinforced by feedback.
right,
So this is where it's helpful to start somewhere where, not just focus on the positive feedback, but where you have a trusted feedback loop that leads up to this, where maybe you don't even have to have that particular kind of conversation because you already had plenty of opportunities to correct course along the way. So,
yeah, yeah. I I sort of chuckle because by the time you need feedback, because there's some sort of you're in a crisis, that state, it's almost too late. I mean, it's not, but you come into those conversations and emotions are already intensified, and you're nervous, and the person receiving it, like you bring a lot of that into that conversation, and wow, that's a tough conversation to start your feedback process on. And that's just partly why, making it a regular process is so, so important, because you don't want, the first time that you have to give tough feedback or really important, feedback on a gap that might exist in expectations. That's the first time. It's going to be challenging, and you're going to go into it with emotions. The person receiving it's going to have a response and reaction to that. You can still prepare for it, and you have to, and that's why, like, it's really on the person who's giving the feedback to go into that conversation as prepared as possible.
Yeah, agreed. to me, this is also an opportunity, if you haven't set expectations, to actually not reset them, but to set them in the first place, where you can also, as a person having to give that feedback, also have, a tough conversation with yourself. What were the steps that led us here? What did I contribute to those? And do I assume responsibility here and do what I should have done in the first place, and accordingly, just reset the whole conversation, and also maybe my mental state, right? Where it's like, I don't need to go into this conversation in a fully destructive mode. I go into this conversation like, I messed this up. I didn't set you up for success. So more business lingo in there. I didn't set you up for success well. I wasn't clear on what this should look like, on what success looks like. And accordingly, you didn't have an opportunity to meet my standards. And so I would like to have that conversation with you about the standard. And then, you can sprinkle some feedback in there that helps the person, but also always under the pretense that this is coming from a place of unspoken expectations, and that what matters is what happens from here on out, and the feedback that's shared from here on out.
Yep. I really like that. Just that simple sentence that you just said, like, I messed this up. I don't think I was clear, and that we were clear on expectations, and I take ownership of that, and I want to take the time today to review and to reset from here, and so that we can be, more clear together going forward. I mean, that's just such a way to instantly, I think, diffuse that conversation, right? To take responsibility and to also approach it from like, we're in this together. Like, hey,
defenses are lowered instantly, and I mean, not all the time, but it helps to not have blood pressure rise to unhealthy amounts, and to get pulses going for sure.
What else?
There's so much that can get in the way of meaningful feedback. You mentioned one thing that, I mean, this has been a theme throughout. Like, it's just, especially when that loop isn't there, where we tend to be afraid of the response, right? That response gives us sweaty palms. It forces us maybe to do a power pose before the meeting because we're so afraid of what might happen. And I've also had some cases where senior leaders, executives, didn't want to give feedback to someone who was critical to the team, at least so far. I will, bracket that. And where they might fear that, that person might have shown very destructive behavior, is struggling with a growing company, struggling to collaborate with others, but carries a lot of ingrained knowledge. I'm not sure about you, but I mean, that conversation comes up regularly for me. On the engineering side, a very common thing. An early engineer who's just accumulated a lot of knowledge, who's a center point of people going to that person. And there's obviously you could argue the stakes are very high when giving that person feedback that their behaviors are not acceptable. Right? Like, you could fear that person might be leaving.
Right.
There's an interesting question in there that I like to bring back to behaviors and what are the values of this organization. Like, is this what this person is doing with the behaviors and actions they are showing? Do those align? There's another business word, with the values that you have set or would like to see in your organization. And usually that makes the conversation a lot easier. Most of the time the answer is no. And then the question is, what's the greater damage to the organization? That one person responding badly and eventually leaving the company, or 10 other people on the team leaving the company because they are fed up with this one person. That happens way too much. But I mean, that's a thing that just keeps us from having that conversation, right? Because we don't know how that person might respond. It might get really angry at us, which
they might check out. They might, they might might leave. They might, we just don't know. And I've definitely, I've been there, right? Like we both have. I think being able to anchor it back to values, if the company has cultural values or cultural principles that have been published somewhere, being able to go back to, hey, we have this value of X, and to anchor it to that rather than to the individual, is super helpful. But yeah, these types of specific conversations are exponentially harder back to if we don't have regular feedback conversations.
Yeah. Agreed.
And so, I don't know, like some of the principles which we've already talked about, like making the feedback as specific as possible, not vague. Obviously, the feedback has to be timely, like we talk about, like as closest to the event, the more useful. So don't have this like laundry list of things that this person did months and months ago. It's more back to, have this conversation regularly and keep the feedback timely. I think one thing you also said, I'll just touch on, is that it's got to be actionable. It can't be about the person's personality, more about the behavior, right?
Whatever the impact or consequences of that behavior is.
This is why it gets back to, preparing and having very specific, when you did this or when you said this, it had this consequence, it had this effect. And maybe they aren't even aware about the effect it had or the consequence or the... And saying it in that, like when this happened, when you said this, or when you articulated that, or when you did that or didn't do this, this is what happened, with facts as much as possible, rather than saying something really general like you should be better at communication. You should, I don't know. And these are techniques that we're now kind of stepping into, which I think is really important, like how to be better at giving feedback and also getting feedback. There are frameworks out there. You and I have talked about a lot of them. Some of them we like, some not so much, but it does get back to being as specific and not vague as possible.
Yeah. And that does require what I like to call a well-developed feedback muscle also. Like it's, that stems from a healthy cycle of having given feedback, having received feedback, and maybe even having gotten feedback on the feedback. Very meta, but sometimes that is helpful. Brings back several memories for me. One is about someone who worked for me wrote a very long document that that person wanted to share with the team. My opinion, it was too long. It needed to be shortened. Like, my assumption is always like anything that's longer than 2 pages, people will not remember anything about that. And that's not, not intentional. It's just how we work as humans, how our brains work.
Right.
And so I wrote up almost like a full page of feedback on this. On, I don't know what, 50 pages of a document, I wrote 1 page of feedback. And then when we discussed the feedback also and the feedback that I had given and how it landed, that person said, well, you could have just told me it's too long. It could have just been 1 sentence. It's too long. People will not remember this. It needs to be shorter. It needs to be more concise. That would have been the feedback. Maybe cut it down to 2 pages. That's always a healthy size. But not for me, that was a learning experience that stuck. And as as Germans, we are more known for our maybe curt approach to feedback.
Little brevity. Some brevity.
Yes. Some brevity, exactly. In our feedback, maybe more often than not to the detriment of the feedback itself and how it might be received. But not everybody has these skills of feedback. Like for my very earliest feedback conversation, I had to sit down and prepare word for word what I wanted to say. Which is helpful either way, but it was just like, just needed to sit down and write this out. And those early conversations were definitely that was not good feedback. And those were also crisis mode. But that's what I found. It's not a well-developed feedback muscle. Like feedback that I'm seeing from clients at times that they've received, or that I've also been, part of feedback groups myself, is, It talks about great leadership skills, or, how a person is a great leader, or how
Yeah.
they are a great communicator. And it speaks to what you just said. Like, that is not useful feedback. But
Yeah.
then again, people don't know how to give it in any other way. Sometimes that
Yeah.
is because they don't actually interact with this person so much, and they don't actually know. They only have a generic picture. Other
Yep.
times it is because they don't know what to focus on, what is useful, or what is a thing that I could really say that would help this person maybe add another percent from the 80%.
Yeah.
It takes time. It takes
Takes
time,
time. Yeah.
and skill, and just have this be a learning experience.
Right. For preparation. Yeah. I'm a big fan of scripting out. I still to this day often script out what I want to say. I've definitely been in conversations and feedback conversations that have been a monologue.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've done it myself. I'm so sorry. And I've received it. That like monologue, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30. The whole meaning is this person talking and you're just,
Squawking.
that
This just one
squawking.
marmot.
Yeah, you're the mama. And I will say, like, just bringing it back to us and personal, like Matthias and I are business partners where, we built this company called the Intentional Organization, and we're coaches. We do this for a living. Like, it's, sometimes challenging for us to carve the space, to make the time, to do the reflection, to have the feedback conversation. I remember one time where we were preparing to do a feedback session with each other, and we started it with this preamble, and I'm going to read it because I always go
Mm-hmm.
back to it. I just appreciate it so much. But before we each gave each other feedback, we said, as your business partner and within the limits of my perception, I offer you the following feedback. And I just wanted to share it on the podcast because I think, like, find an opener like that, like as your manager and within the limit, whatever, to create that space. Feedback is emotional. It is inherently emotional.
Yeah.
And so anything you can do to bring the conversation into a space where it's, I don't want to use the buzzword of psychological safety, but I will.
It's fair. It's fair. I mean,
It requires psychological safety and feeling safe to hear, feeling safe to process and to respond. You ideally want the person to hear, I want to help you get better,
yeah.
other than you're not good enough. That's your
Yeah.
main job. You want that person to hear, I want to help. I want to help you. I am here, and these are the limits of my perception. Now, your job as a manager, as a leader, is, of course, to validate and to get as much clear feedback as possible.
I do love that sentence. Like, it immediately frames the perspective that you're coming from. It doesn't just state within the limits of my perception, it also limits the scope of your observation. Like, your business
Right.
partner, manager, as your peer, teammate, whatever, right? It establishes that. And then it says, like, it helps create a space for conversation by saying, like, within the limits of my perception. It's like,
Yep.
I think I'm seeing this, but, I could be wrong, or there's probably more to this that I don't know. Let's talk about that if you're open to it. And
Right.
then it offers feedback. It's not like this, it's not just saying that my feedback is the law, or, that it is the whole truth. It's a thing that I'm giving to you, and you get to decide what you do with it. I hope you're doing something with it, to help us keep a trust and feedback loop. But also, again, like, you might need more information. It might need a longer conversation to uncover what is really going on here. I'm a big fan of that sentence.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a powerful one. It really helps to, in one sentence, position the conversation as supportive rather than as threatening. It just makes it clear. And again, not to keep repeating this, but the more you do this, the more it's going to feel like feedback is a gift rather than this threat or this challenge. So
Yeah.
the other thing, it's important with feedback to, to revisit it and to have expectations like, "Wait, let's check back in on this in a week," or "Let's check back in a
Yeah.
couple weeks." Make some sort of agreement with each other around what the expectations are. coming out of that conversation. It's like, hey, let's follow up on this specific situation.
Yeah.
And there's a contract with each other. There's an accountability, right? Another another chapter that we have in our book just around accountability. We've covered a lot of ground. Whew.
We've covered a lot of feedback ground. Agreed. I think one of the topics I'd like to move to is how you can actually get good feedback. Because, I mean, we've covered most of this conversation from the perspective of the person giving the feedback, right? But we assuming that person also knows how to give good feedback, which, as we also established, isn't always the case, and also hasn't been the case at all times for us in our roles as founders and executives. Thing that I've been thinking about and that I talk about with many of my clients is how can you actually get good feedback? A lot of them, and I've seen this in my team, ask people just put out generic requests. You know, like we said, like I said earlier, like my door is always open, or feedback is always welcome, or somebody on your team asks you, or your man, you know, in whatever direction asks you, do you have any feedback for me? Right? It's all very generic requests. You don't have a trusted feedback cycle, or, you know, not the developed feedback muscle can just leave you to scramble. And so very late in one of my tenures as CTO, I've had this conversation with a friend, and it was eye-opening about getting good feedback, you know, rather than putting out very broad requests that usually yields broad responses. You know, there's a whole dialogue we could have about start, stop, continue as a feedback framework and how it tends to foster more of the generic feedback when people just don't know how to give useful feedback.
Start communicating better.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Continue to be a great leader. It's also a favorite of mine. Right. And it's like, okay, great. I know exactly what I need to do here. I've given talks on this several times already, and it's always such an eye opener, which always is, you know, in some ways mind blowing and surprising to me, but also I think back to the times when I started using specific questions that I asked people about, you know, specific areas that I wanted to improve. Which, you know, did require me to think about what is it that I actually want to improve? What's an area where I know, maybe from past feedback, or you know, maybe I've uncovered this with my coach or something. What's an area that I need to improve? For example, communication, or it is how I show up in meetings, how I behave in meetings. Give me a mirror to hold up to myself, how I behave in meetings. Yeah. And so I just, you know, started to come up with the help of this friend of ours that we both know, just to ask people specific questions. And for example, one of these questions is, what are 3 things I'm contributing to the organization? Second question, what are 3 things I'm doing that are hindering the organization or my team? How would you describe my, for example, communication style? Or it could be, how would you describe how I show up in meetings? And then another question, if you were to advise me, what could I do differently to address the things that are hindering the organization? Those are magical questions. Yeah, very specific. We should dissect why.
Picking a specific area, whether it's showing up in meetings, if you want to get good feedback, pick an area that you maybe want to improve on. And these questions, almost like going into that conversation with these questions as a starting point. So you're not starting with like, hey, give me some feedback. It's like, hey, I want to really improve with speaking at company meetings. I remember when I had moved up in my career, and I was starting to present at the company all hands, you know, this monthly meeting, high pressure. And it was terrifying. And I remember starting to talk with my boss, and I wish I had these questions, like what are, to really think about, like, okay, how am I coming across, or what are the things that are working, maybe not working. And then we have this joint understanding of like, hey, I want to improve. I want to improve how I present at company meetings, and each time get better. And check in with each other after each time. Hey, what three things, didn't work, or what are the three things that really were impactful that I said here, or even my body language, or how I was prepared, or all those things. That's like having that specific goal and that specific thing that you're focused on is a great place to start. That get you back to that, like, how can I get good feedback? Is, well, ask for it. Don't wait for it. And then ask for around a specific area that you really want to improve on. Public speaking's a huge one. Showing up in meetings, or how you are received in meetings, is another great one.
Yeah, what I also love about these questions, like besides they force you, as you said, to figure out a specific area, they help guide people in their feedback, right? They set expectations on what you're after. Like if you say three things that might, seem a little bit harsh or a little bit maybe too specific, but also, it might make it less daunting to folks than just having a big text box, right? Like that, where you could write anything and you just, maybe you get rewarded for coming up with as many things. Like, just give me three things. Like it's a doable list. The other thing that I love is they help balance out the power differential. Like, say the second question, what are three things I'm doing that are hindering the organization or my team, right? The word hindering explicitly gives the other person permission to talk openly about, what am I actually doing that is holding this team back, right? From your perspective. And I mean, of course, that requires, again, that level of trust where when you get that feedback, you actually do something about it, or you don't, yell at the other person or are upset that you're getting this feedback. We assume that you're actually interested in this. Yeah, they guide the feedback very nicely from my perspective. And they put more of the onus on the person seeking feedback in preparation, and thinking about them. But in return, ideally you actually get useful feedback, right? Which might not be the case with whatever other framework you're using.
The key here is you want both people to be able to be prepared. So if you're going into this conversation, you're going to ask for specific questions, or you're going to want to cover a specific topic, share that with the person in advance. Get that person a little bit of time to think and prepare. Again, knowing that you're going to have a monthly feedback conversation, go into it like, hey, I really want to focus on this area, and here's some questions. And so then that person has time to really give thoughtful responses around these areas. I'm a big fan. And hindering, you're right. That's a key word there.
An offsite, the team that I mentioned previously, they were really struggling with the word hindering. They did have a good point. Like, I gave them a form where, that effectively asked them to talk about somebody else and how they're hindering the organization. It's not exactly the same as giving someone directly permission to tell you to your face. I think companies struggle with this, teams struggle with this when they have a nice culture, right? Where it's the focus is on positivity and not saying anything that could demotivate people. Which the assumption always is that, if it's tough feedback, if it is quote unquote negative feedback, that's what that will achieve, right? That will be the inevitable outcome. If you tell somebody something negative, you either have to wrap it in two positives as a poop sandwich, or you can't do that too much. You have to keep focusing on the positive sides to not demotivate people, right? But then blind spots will never be addressed. But that being said, as a German, we are more known, as we've established, not just for brevity, but also for focusing on mostly is the stuff that we don't like. And I know I don't speak for all Germans here. Culturally speaking, we probably have a more forthcoming way of giving feedback, not offering, than, say a Californian culture or maybe even a British culture.
Tis true.
But also, that said, like, I've come around over the years to appreciation or to highlighting what somebody contributes, what somebody's doing well, to help them understand what they should keep doing. Like, right, what is the continue part and the start, stop, continue is the stuff that they are already contributing that they need to do more of, that actually brings value to the team, the culture, work output, etc. Right.
Right.
And so, I mean, I've made an effort even over the early years of us working together when it was, me as a German and a mostly US team, to always, when I give feedback, to look for something that is a positive, right? That I
Right.
like, something I like. Right? And
Yeah.
that's not just the poop sandwich, but also setting this up on a foot. Even just, it was a mindset shift for me. I think that
Right.
was maybe the more important thing here, where
Yeah.
I don't only dump a list of stuff that I don't like. It's just, here's some appreciation that I also did for myself, but also it's also for your benefit.
Yeah. I mean, it's important, right? Like you want to find, obviously, the gaps, and you want to share kind of things that are hindering, but there's also got to be, some reinforcing positive behavior. And again, we're not talking about the poop sandwich here, but we're just talking about like, this was an area I noticed that it improved, or this,
Yeah.
reinforced this specific thing, give a little bit of glimmer of, hey, a little more of this is what we're expecting to see, or what I'm expecting to see. Something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's where, those teams who want to focus on, appreciation are they're somewhat right in that this can be a great boost, right? And
Yeah.
it just, even just like how
Right.
saying thank you to somebody for something they did and truly meaning it,
Yeah.
or, telling someone that you liked what they did and why, that can just be a great confidence booster.
Yeah. Yeah. That you appreciate something, they did, you're grateful for something they did. And making that's just as important as part of the feedback process, is making sure there's regular reinforcement of appreciation or even gratitude for something positive that was done.
Yeah. If you need to give tough feedback, give tough feedback, but ideally have a trusted feedback loop where it doesn't feel like it's too negative or too demotivating. It's just the
Yeah.
continuation of something that's already happening.
Right.
And maybe
Right.
it's just not as appreciative as it usually is. Well, on that note, more on feedback in our book, a lot more. As Sarah said, it's one of her favorite chapters. It's also one of my favorite chapters. We made a conscious choice to include it in our book, as opposed to many of the other business books that don't talk about it too much. But before we close,
Oh, okay.
let's do something lighthearted. Sarah, what have you been reading lately?
Okay. I just finished Elizabeth Gilbert's new book. It's called All the Way to the River.
Uh-huh.
It's a memoir. It's, I think, her third memoir. A lot of people know Elizabeth Gilbert from her very successful first memoir, not her first book, called Eat, Pray, Love, which was
Uh-huh.
turned into a movie with Julia Roberts. But this is a very different story. I really appreciated her vulnerability, and yeah, I'm actually going to go see her speak on her book tour
Oh, very
next
cool.
next week. And having written a book, I have a deep, deep, deep respect and appreciation for writers and for people like Liz Gilbert, who so vulnerable. It's a masterclass in
Yeah.
vulnerability, and to put herself and share what she's able to share, and to be that raw. Whew, I mean, it's. I read a review of it. At times it's excruciating. It's excruciating to read, and she said it was excruciating to live too. Anyway,
I bet,
I finished
yes.
that. I don't know what's next. I'll probably go to something. I like to switch it up. Memoir. I'll probably go back to maybe some sort of leadership book. But
Yeah.
how about you? What are you reading, or what have you recently read?
I made a conscious choice this summer to read fiction books again. Like, I've been
Nice.
reading so many nonfiction books over the years. There's only so much you can digest in these books.
Yeah.
And this summer I started reading science fiction books, and or already finished reading the Three Body Problem trilogy,
Nice.
which is probably more than 2,000 pages in total. But it is, and it's just, a pun for everybody knowing the book. It's a stellar series. And it's just, there's so many tiebacks to actual real,
Yeah.
very cutting edge physics, which I find fascinating, but it is incredible. I've probably plowed through all of these books in maybe 3-4 weeks. It was a fast read.
That's a good summer break.
Yeah. Anything you've been cooking that has stood out or has just been enjoyable to cook and also to eat?
I did last week I made, what are they called? Lentil smashed tacos. So that inside of the taco is lentils simmered with tomatoes and onion and all sorts of spices. I will have to say they were okay. But truth be told, I think it really is about the toppings. And so, the fresh guacamole, the fresh pico, you just can't go wrong. But other than that, I'm drawing a blank.
That's okay. I mean, one at a time. I have a very specific, we had tacos last Friday also, not with this recipe, but I do love tacos. And the other day of the weekend, I made a very German meal, which is eggs and mustard sauce.
Whoa.
So it's hard-boiled eggs with a very mustardy bechamel sauce. And usually very classic in Germany is either potato mash or just boiled potatoes. It's not a very colorful meal, but it is delicious. It
sounds really good. And it like all those things together is like a potato salad, like with egg.
It is a potato. Yeah.
That sounds really good. It's different.
Delightful.
It sounds very German. Very German.
It is. Mustardy eggs is definitely, even for many folks that we know, is a childhood memory kind of thing. And if it's not clear, dear listener, from this conversation, like cooking is and has been a big part even of our partnership and friendship, and is generally something we both enjoy doing, and we spend a lot of time in the kitchen. Well, with that, thank you for listening to the Intentional Organization podcast. We'll include all the source material and stuff in the show notes, and we will catch you next time.
Thank you.